Welcome to the Influential Leader channel, where we speak to amazing leaders in the industry to discover what makes them tick, the challenges they have overcome, and we ask them to share their experience. Today's episode, we have joining with me, Steve Grease, the founder and CEO of Nudge Group, a company that works with global startups, scale-up, pre-seed, Series A, all the way to IPO. With several products such as Nudge as a Service, Nudge Remote, Nudge Culture, the company is able to offer founders different ways to grow their business, including recruiting, funding, employer branding, onboarding, and so much more. Steve is also the CEO and publisher of Balance the Grind, a global work-life balance platform showcasing stories from people from all walks of life. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us today.
That's a hell of an intro, Sarah.
Oh my gosh, you're amazing. And I was saying to you earlier, there's just so many avenues we could share with, this could probably be like a series of podcasts.
Let's do a whole 10-part series. I'm down with that. Let's do it.
We could do nudge recruitment, nudge funding.
Yep, I'm ready.
Oh my gosh. So tell us a little bit about you and how your journey is going and what challenges you're facing today.
That's a good question. I've done a lot of podcasts in the last, get me guess, probably the last 3 months, and they've all wanted to sort of delve into my deep dark past as a childhood and all that kind of stuff. But your question is much easier. It's what are my challenges I'm facing now. I think that there's a couple of really big challenges for us as a business, and there's a couple of challenges that I'm going through as well. So if I think about the challenges of business, obviously the market has changed massively in 6 months. I mean, I think the speed the market changes these days just continues to blow me away, whether it be salaries going up, salaries going down, too many candidates, not enough candidates, too many jobs, not enough jobs, and so forth. And because we're global, there's also that side to it. For example, Australia, I think, is probably going to bypass the worst of this downturn that we're going through. And I think awesome. I do genuinely believe that, and that's because we keep digging up dirt and selling it, and I think that will continue to help. But I also think that it's so much smaller as an economy. It just doesn't seem to have the same bang impact as it does perhaps.
I also feel we're just getting on with it. We're just ignoring those indicators, saying whatever, we've done this before, we're just going to push through like we always do.
And I think there's a general positivity in Australians. That's probably why I live here still after 22 years. I just think it's much more positive place. So London, for example, is dead. I mean, it couldn't be deader. Our London team are really just focused on the US and Dubai right now, because the London startup scene is it's horrific. I mean, they're going through, so many horrible things right now with the inflation and so forth. I mean, it blows the problems here out the water. And then you've got places like Dubai, they're completely recession proof, obviously, because of the oil industry. So they're booming with their climate tech. The US is letting everybody go, but the startup space is still growing. So that's become a really good market for us, where there's actually a lot of candidates and a lot of jobs. It's so big. There's always going to be enough for a company of our size. I think if we were huge, it would be different. But because we're quite small, it doesn't matter. So you see all these different things. In Singapore, I've been on the phone to Singapore this morning. There's a massive amount happening there as well, because I think they've just come out of such a horrific lockdown situation the government's put them through. The positivity they have just being allowed out is just pushing through any problems.
And maybe they've got the same situation where we had, is we've come out and we've had an abundance of money because we haven't been spending.
I think you're right.
There's an opportunity to do that.
And I think people forget how small it is. And look, they're still benefiting from Hong Kong being totally stuffed, and that's not going to go away. So that they're all very, very different marketplaces that we're working in. So I find that quite fascinating. But, we're going into a time where I think a lot of companies will be coming to us wanting funding, and they're not going to get it as easily as they did, or they're just not going to get it at all. And I think that's going to be a challenge for us to deal with, managing founders' expectations, making them understand it actually has to be a genuine business. There has to be an idea of where it might become profitable rather than just an idea and all those kinds of things. So that's going to be a little different.
Yeah, I know in my experience, people want to see a product that's already been used and that people are buying it. They want to see revenue or and the potential for recurring revenue. And if you don't have that, then sometimes you're overlooked at this point.
Do you know what I think it is? I think they want to see, because everyone can get their revenue to grow by spending a lot of money. They want to see revenue growth because people like what you've already got, as opposed to because you've got something new every week. I think that's the biggest difference. So that's probably the business challenge. Personally, and we touched on this earlier, Nudge is always focused very much on the early stage businesses and taking them all the way to IPO, as you mentioned. And we're now getting some companies that are getting quite large that we've sort of dealt with from early stages, because we're 3.5 years old, which is still very young, but startups grow very quickly.
Yeah.
And we're now building products for them because we haven't really had to before. And we're building subscription models. We're finding ways to offer them, their challenges are completely different to what you might have at a seed or Series A. So we're trying to make sure we have the right things to be able to help those founders all the way through. And Balance the Grind is sort of looking at becoming a far more established product, as opposed to, it was really a blog when we bought it. Now it's a proper publication. It's got advertisers. It's got a YouTube show, which is starting this year. It's got all sorts of different things happening this year that you'll see. And those are two product companies, and I've never built a product company. So for me personally, I think the biggest challenge is, and it's been great because most of my clients are product companies, is understanding how friggin' hard it is to build a product company. It's so much harder than I thought. It's so much more complex than I thought. It takes so much longer. And the worst thing is, it's so much more expensive. So I think for me, that's probably my personal biggest challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you've gone from, working with yourself as a service business and now making it tangible. So you've said that, is that to solve a problem that you are now solving for your business, for the companies that you're working for or with rather, or is that just something that you feel all businesses need to go down that route of making something tangible?
It's both. And the irony is our most product-focused product is actually called Nudge as a Service, which is kind of ironic considering we're moving from a service business to a product. I've only just realized that when you said that. Look, I think it's both. I think Nudge, if it's going to have the scalability that we want it to have globally, it needs to have more recurring revenue. Recruitment is not a recurring revenue business unless you have contractor books. Startups don't traditionally use contractor books. So we had to find another way to solve that problem. So that's kind of where it's an answer for us as a business. But more so, it's always been a case of, what do our founders need? And the founders that we started with 3.5 years ago that might have had 10 people now suddenly have 80, and their needs are totally different to what they were. And we need to be able to continue to support them all the way to whichever exit, whether it be a trade sale or an IPO.
Which is just like a startup business, right? So you're,
you're
discovering things that you need to just create to solve the problems.
Well, we're on the journey with them. I
love it.
It's funny, isn't it? I talk about that a lot with them. I go, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. But it's kind of nice going on that journey with so many people at the same time.
Well, it's about staying relevant, and at the end of the day, your business has to be profitable, and you're only going to get that by creating products that people actually need and can use.
100%. And I think coming and meeting them so early, which has always been our model. As I mentioned to you before, we'll meet people when there's two of them with an idea, and we'll start working with them, and we won't charge them anything. But working with them so early, you really do go on that full journey with them, and there's such an element of not just trust, almost camaraderie with those founders in terms of both building your businesses together. It's pretty cool.
I'd love to get to the people side, because you're very service based, obviously moving into product. And I know with startups, I often say the first five people in the business that are helping them grow usually determines whether they're successful or not. And I don't know if that's something you find. If you get all the wrong people, you can have the best product, but it's never going to work. And so, that people part really interests me. And obviously you've got a very people-centric background with recruitment. So, what are you, how can you enlighten us on how do you build a team, and how do you know without knowing whether it's going to be successful?
It's a question I get asked to speak about a lot, actually. First 5 hires. Look, I'm in the enviable position of, this is my third business, and pretty much everyone up until now, what are the 12 or 13 of us now, has worked for me before. So they've worked for me in one of those two businesses. So I kind of had known entities who knew me and I knew them. And admittedly, this business was very different, and it took all of them a good 3 months to get their head around what we were doing compared to what my other companies were. And this is very different to those other companies. It's really important, I think, people understand that Nudge is not just a recruitment company like my other ones. It's completely different. It took me a long time to get my head around it. So I'm lucky in that respect. And I think, if you have that ability to hire people you've worked with before, knowing how someone works, even if it's a different scenario, and seeing how they react to stresses and successes and all that kind of, you can't buy that knowledge. It's just incredible. So that would be awesome. And I would suggest that be more important than friends. I understand why people hire friends. Totally get it. Yeah. It always ends up with a scenario, which is another subject I get asked to talk a lot about, of when you go from startup to scale up. usually there is a point there where your friend, not always, but most times I would say, 8 out of 10, your friend is not going to be up to the job at a larger scale that perhaps you hired them for. And you need to have that conversation a lot earlier than before when that happens, so that you can work out what you're going to do with them. It could be that they go and do new product development. It could be that it doesn't matter. There's a lot of, we could talk about that all day. But so I think friends are great because they support you and you know them. But I think people you've worked with in any capacity are far more important. I don't necessarily think you should be using a recruiter for those hires. We always encourage people to really exhaust their own networks before they come to us. And I think that's super, super important. You know, when we're making the first 2-3 hires, and we have done it and we do it, it's just so important. The stress on us to get it right is
Well, it's
terrifying.
about the personality more than their skills, I would say at that time.
It
You know,
is.
do they have the passion? Are they going to drive? Are they going to learn the skills that they're going to need? Because really, you don't even know what someone needs when you're first hiring in a startup.
You don't. And it's very hard to know someone's personality to the depth you need to going through a recruitment company or through a recruitment process. You just don't have the time. You're not going to do 25 interviews, which is why I think we always encourage people, go and find people you know in some capacity first.
Or I got referred to people. I know even just in the industry I'm in, people ask me, oh, I need someone for this. Do you know anyone? And, you know, if I have time to think about it, often I do. I've met someone in that.
Oh, yeah. Referrals are, we can never do as good a job as someone will when they refer someone to you. I would love to say we can, and some recruiters will probably tell you they can, but they can't. Referrals are always the best hires.
Yeah. Well, you know their skills and you can see what their talents are.
100%. And usually the person referring them knows you well enough to be able to match that just through knowledge of each person.
I actually worked with a gentleman many years ago, and he only hired people if they were referred to by someone within the company, because the way he saw it was, you're not going to refer someone that you don't want to work with. You're not going to refer someone that can't do the job. And it worked.
It would do, but it does have its limitations, particularly for a tech startup that wants to scale like crazy. Yeah, but if you're not scaling like crazy, then 100% I would agree with that man. He is right.
Oh yeah, great. Well, he was already established, so maybe it does work if you're an established large organization.
Perhaps, yeah, but yeah, I totally agree.
Very good. And oh look, there's so many other things I want to talk to you about. So oh gosh, that's yeah. Sorry.
Why don't we talk? I tell you what we should talk about. We should talk about because not many people ask me about balance the grind. So balance the grind is a really interesting subject to me because it's not something I ever understood before. I've never owned a publication. I've never owned a product business.
And you bought this publication, so you didn't build it from the ground up. Is that correct?
I did not. So my head of content is a gentleman by the name of Hal Newham, and Hal had me on Balance the Grind just when I started Nudge. He interviewed me for Balance the Grind, and it was his side hustle. It was a blog he'd started writing when he had a child. His child's maybe 5 now, 6. And he wanted to start talking about how people manage being parents and working. So he just started writing. He's a writer. He loves writing. Anyway, so he'd done about, I don't know, 1,000 interviews on this, but it was just his side hustle, and he was working in an agency full time. And he came to me about maybe 6 months after I'd been on there, and he said, do you want to buy Balance the Grind? And I was like, what are you talking about? Why would I do that? We're a recruitment company. And anyway, he kept talking about it. He's saying there was a really good synergy. He liked me. I'd sponsored a couple of his articles and stuff like that. And so I said, look, I need a head of content. Nudge was really growing, and we were pumping out so much content. It was killing me trying to do everything at once. And I said, come work for me. You can continue it as a side hustle, and we'll talk about it, in maybe 6 months. 6 weeks later, I bought it, because once he came to work for me, it became so obvious, the synergies.
Yeah.
And so we bought it, and he doesn't like running businesses. He didn't have the money to grow it, but he wanted to see it become so much more. We got on so well and still do, and it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. He loves what it's become. So it's been one of those magical moments that just happen every so often when you see those opportunities and you just run with them. So I think the interesting thing about that is seeing how the world has changed during COVID and how people have changed during remote working, and having a company like Balance the Grind during that time. We now have 2,500 people been interviewed on that.
Yeah, wow.
And hearing their stories about how they're working and how they're managing, and understanding that balance is different for everyone. Balance for one person is very different to a different person. And that's an important thing. And trying to attain the idea of balance that is often portrayed out there is lunacy. And I think the audience grew from maybe 50,000 before COVID to nearly 170,000 now, which is mental. And we don't do any paid media or search. It's all organic, which is insane. And I think what it was a lot of people were looking for, I guess, is it confirmation? Is it validation of the way they were living their lives? Because their lives had changed. They really liked their new life, but they weren't sure if they were allowed to have their life like that as we were getting back to normal. So they were going online trying to find this. And because we got so many articles about so many people find us and then they end up staying. And I think it's really interesting to see how the world, I mean, it's a global audience, actually biggest in the US, then UK, then here, then India randomly, and then a few other countries. But it's interesting to see how people have really gone online and looked for information about this and how everyone's mindset has changed. I don't think everyone has quite got to their heads around what a massive change the world has just gone through. It's absolutely massive. And I think having a publication like this, one, I've loved it because I've learned so much and I still know very little about that business compared to what I should. But having that business and seeing it has been even more eye-opening for me that I might have missed if I hadn't have owned that company.
Yeah. And look, if you can find a great copywriter, hang on to them, and obviously you did.
Yeah, 100%. He loves writing. I mean, gosh, I don't know if you've been following, we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while. You would see the sheer volume of content we pump out. It's crazy.
Yeah, and look, and I think content is really important, and new and fresh content. You talk about these AI platforms that can write content for you, and you're getting all the same stuff out. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. I actually wanted to go back to that, the change that's been happening, and obviously you've had lots of experience in talking to the thought and the mindset around what's been happening in the world today. And I believe we've developed the world, and the people that are coming through in the new generations is the world that needs to be, the people that need to be here for the world the way it's going. And we do a lot of people going, oh no, we have to go back to work and we have to do this, and let's go back to the way we were. And people aren't necessarily embracing the change that is actually what we need because of all the different things that are happening and the technology that's coming out and how fast it's growing. Our generation A's are the people that are meant to help us grow that.
Look, I think I think basically we've just accelerated what would have happened, right? So we would have got here in 10 years, it's accelerated. But there are some issues that have happened because it's happened so fast. As with anything, right? One of the biggest conversations I have with founders is when you grow a company super fast, you're going to have a lot of challenges. It's very different. There's a lot of things that get missed. Same things happen with the world. And I think for me, the biggest worry that I have, and this is particularly relevant in my industry, but also in any services industry or an industry where you're an accountant or a lawyer, or something like that, is the learning that happened in the office is gone. The osmosis of knowledge, the passing of knowledge that happens by sitting next to
talking by the water cooler.
Yeah, but not even that. They're just sitting next to people who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think, we've implemented a new policy. We've never had a policy about coming into the office. You come in whenever or however you want. We've always been like that, even before COVID. But we're now making sure that everyone comes in 1 day a week, which is not a big deal. But 1 day a week, just because I think it keeps the culture. It's enough to keep the culture, but it also just gives the younger generation that osmosis learning, which a lot of them don't even know they're not getting because they've literally never had.
They've been hired online and never gone into the office, which I know grads are having that issue, never met the people that they're working with.
Yeah, so I think that combination is super important. I think there are certain roles that obviously can be fully remote, a lot of technology-based roles, absolutely 100%. And you got to take a lens to it of common sense, which rarely happens in this world. But I think it's important that we do bring that into this world. So there's still issues with it. I think it's great. I think the way it's gone is great. I mean, just to give you an example, before COVID, I probably would have done a video interview with a candidate maybe once a month because they were super busy. They were in an environment they couldn't leave their office or whatever it be, or they were in another state. We have only done one face-to-face interview with a candidate since we came back to work. And that's insane. Like, that would have been unheard of. Every recruiter has their office in the city, so it's easy to get to. Now you don't need to have an office in the city. You can have an office anywhere. It used to be my biggest complaint. I always wanted an office in this suburb near me. It sort of be better for me, but we couldn't because it was hard for people to get to. Well, we could do now. I actually don't want that anymore. But
you don't need it.
It's funny, isn't it? But I think it's fascinating. Like, that's just this whole industry of recruitment has completely changed on its head, and no one even talks about it. It's
well,
crazy.
technically, it's almost global. You're not
No.
you don't have to just hire someone in the state that you're in or the main capital that you're in. I've worked with businesses now where, okay, let's open it up to all the states, and you can get great talent that work regionally for almost regional prices. Whereas, if you had to get them in somewhere like Sydney, you might be paying double.
Well, my exec team have all moved away. They're not in the Sydney. They come in once a week, but they live in Newcastle or Wollongong. But I think the biggest, excuse me, I've got a bit of a throat. I think the biggest change is the US. So the US was so city centric. Like if you're in Dallas, you had someone in Dallas. If you were in Boston, you had someone in Boston. The recruitment firms over there would typically only have one or two clients because the clients were so big and they only hired in that region. And that whole industry there is going through this crazy scenario where they're hiring people anywhere in the world, anywhere in America for a start, but also anywhere in the world. But if you open up the whole of the US, oh my gosh, the candidate pool is enormous. And they've realized this and they're like, this is insane. This is incredible, which has been good for us because it enabled us to break into that market a lot easier than perhaps we would have had to have done it city by city by city.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that now. So that is one of the biggest markets in the world. Has just been monumental shift, monumental.
And so the opportunities you've said earlier with the startups, there's still a lot coming out of the US. You're working with the US in startup.
Look, we don't target US startups because we're not ready to do that yet. We launched into other countries because a lot of Australian companies wanted to go into those countries. Now being in those countries, we're working with startups in those countries. So we've got startups in Singapore who want to come here. We've got startups in London who want to go to the US. Really our key markets are Dubai, London, Singapore, and Australia. And wherever they want to go, we will hire for them. And a lot of them want to hire into the US. So that's why we're doing quite a lot of work there.
And you said you weren't ready. So what do you need to be ready? And not so much just for you, but I want to lend that to like other businesses that think, oh, I'm not ready, or I want to do it, but other people are telling them not ready. So what's not ready mean?
I think you need to understand the scale of the US and the competitiveness of the US. And if you're going to go into the US, you need to go in the US and you don't focus on anything else.
Yeah, right.
So for me to go in the US, I need to know Australia is working perfectly, which I'm pretty happy it is now. But London needs to be working perfectly. Singapore needs to be working perfectly, and Dubai needs to be. I can't go Dubai and the US or Singapore. You just can't. You have to just go, that's what I'm doing, and I'm not doing anything else.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by not ready. There are other markets that are more important to me to conquer based on the people that we deal with and where I feel that the opportunities are before we go and have a crack at that. Because it's no easy feat. The UK was easy for me and obvious for me being British and having a lot of contacts there. Singapore was obviously a bridge between that. Dubai was really a climate tech thing. So there was, the very strategic decisions around that. I'd love to go in the US, but I'm not ready.
Yeah. Well, you have to get everything else right and get all the glitches out before you go there, because obviously it's a glitch on scale is a huge mistake, right?
And it's expensive. It's expensive going there. I think the other thing people forget is if you start to have success there, the money you need to scale up to meet that success is enormous. Like it's success there is so much greater, particularly for Australian founders. Great example is if you look at a Series A company here, it might be 100 to 200 people. It might even be 50. If you look at a Series A in the UK, it's probably 1,000. If you're looking at a Series A in the US, don't even talk about it. Like it's beyond. It's like a Series D here. So you have to understand the differences of scale and being able to meet those. Otherwise, you'll fail, and no one wants to do that. I mean, we all have to, but no one wants to.
No, that's right. That's right. No, I really love that advice. I think that's really important before taking it over there. And look, maybe it is about looking at other markets first. Maybe Singapore is a slightly smaller market than the US.
Well, I think the way we're doing
it, the money's still there, though.
I think we're lucky in that a lot of our companies in those countries that I talked about are going into the US. So we can work with them, and that's kind of working in the US without working in the US. So it gives us a little bit of a grounding, gives us some footing, gives us some understanding, gives us some context before we go heading right in there into hitting those companies. So it's almost like, what's the word the tech guys use? It's almost like having a sandpit to play around and learn some stuff in.
Yeah, I love it. And I guess that exposure and that building that network is really important to get started before you get started.
Exactly right.
Awesome. Was there anything else you could share with us that you'd love our influential leaders that are trying to grow their organizations through people and team that they should know moving into this new world?
So many things. Oh, look, I mean, I think understanding the changing needs that your people will have as your company scales is one of the biggest failures that I see CEOs make, and I've been guilty of it myself in my previous companies. When you start out, you need people who are great with ambiguity, who can turn their hand to anything, who like turning their hand to everything, who like to be involved in everything. And that's amazing. But when you hit that certain scale where you become technically a scale up, I suppose, I mean, there's a lot of debate about what that means. To me, it means you don't have necessarily a limited runway. You've kind of got an unlimited runway. That's where I feel the change is. But when you hit that, then you have to have people who stay in their lane and are specific and are targeted to what they do. It's a completely different person to what you've been hiring. So that transition from startup to scale up and understanding that from a people point of view, which we won't go into now because it will take hours. But I talk about it a lot. So I'm sure there'll be something online and we're talking about it. But that change from scale up to startup and making sure you start addressing that change well before you get to scale up is the most important thing you can do in terms of retention and making sure you don't stuff it up, because most people do, and I have as well. And if we can help people not do that, that will be probably one of the best things I can achieve as in terms of what Nudge does.
Yeah, great. And I love that you can help them on that journey for all aspects of, the ambiguous person that can, change and do what they need to do to make it successful, to the person that's really technically competent in what it is that they've been assigned to do.
Yeah, and you don't have to get rid of those people. I mean, some will obviously drift off, but I think you don't have to get rid of them. Some can be reassigned, but that's why you need to start thinking about it so much earlier.
Yeah, that's great. And sometimes it's just a conversation, I guess. What are they trying to achieve, and how do they align to the vision and the goals of where the organization's going?
Some of them will make that transition no problem as long as you talk to them about it. Others, they might not, but there's other roles that you can create that are different from what they're doing. Like, you don't need to be head of product anymore. I've actually got a better role for you for your skill set. We're going to hire a new head of product, and you need to understand why. But you need to have that conversation long before you hire that new head of product, because if you just go and hire them, Mr. Over here will get pissed off and leave. So it's just making sure, there's a lot of founders feel a lot of loyalty to people who've helped them build their early businesses, which I totally get. But you need to also understand that if you have 10 people, probably only 6 of them will end up coming on that journey at the most, and 4 of them will leave, and you need to accept that and be comfortable with that, and actually make sure you have that conversation with them at the right time. Otherwise, it will very much hinder your growth.
Yeah. And that does come to tough decisions, which, if you want to be a founder and success, then some of these things have to happen.
Horrible, but yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve, on the Influential Leader channel. For anyone out there that has any comments, please join the conversation and write them below. But if you would like to hear other stories around this, please let us know what they are, and we'll find those people and have a chat with them. And I'm sure there might be more to do with Steve here, because he's got a wealth of knowledge that we'd love to hear more about. But please subscribe to the Influential Leader channel down below. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.